The bright San Francisco sun shone down, casting long shadows over the gathered crowd as Ethan Thompson stood at the front. He faced the brown wooden coffin, polished and elegant, that held the body of his wife, Margaret Anderson. Ethan, a tall man with sharp, piercing eyes, wore a perfectly fitted black suit that made him look strong and important. But his face was pale, and his lips were tight, showing just how sad he was, or how sad he wanted everyone to think he was. "Rest in peace, Margaret," Ethan whispered softly. His voice sounded full of sorrow, but his eyes told a different story. They didn't look sad at all. Instead, they looked cold and thoughtful, as though he was planning something big. He threw a handful of dirt onto the coffin, and the sound of it hitting the wood echoed in the quiet cemetery. Around him, people wept and whispered kind words about Margaret, but Ethan wasn't really listening to any of it. Standing nearby was Olivia Turner, Ethan's young secretary. Olivia was beautiful, with long dark hair and sharp eyes that always seemed to notice everything. She wore a tight black dress that hugged her figure and high heels that made her seem taller than she was. Her dress was fancy, almost too fancy for a funeral. Olivia tried to look as sad as everyone else, but she was restless. Every now and then, she glanced at Ethan, her eyes meeting his in a way that spoke of secrets. The priest, an old man with a tired voice, was saying prayers for Margaret. His words floated into the air, mixing with the distant sounds of cars honking in the busy city. Ethan pretended to listen, but he wasn't really paying attention. His mind was far away, thinking about Margaret's sudden death. She had died of a heart attack, and while Ethan made sure to act shocked and heartbroken, inside he thought it was a lucky break. With Margaret gone, all her money and property were now within his reach. When the ceremony ended, people began leaving the graveyard. They said nice things about Margaret, shared memories, and offered Ethan their condolences. Ethan nodded politely, shaking hands and muttering quiet thanks. But inside, he was already planning his future, thinking about the big houses, fancy cars, and rich life he would soon have. Olivia stayed close to Ethan, helping him thank the guests. She handed out small cards and offered kind words, but her mind was elsewhere too. The perfume she wore was light but noticeable, and it reminded Ethan of the many secret moments they had shared. As Ethan was lost in his thoughts, a voice called out to him, "Mr. Thompson?" Ethan turned to see Nathan Anderson, Margaret's nephew. Nathan was in his mid-30s with red, tired eyes from crying, but his gaze was steady and sharp. He walked up to Ethan, offering his hand. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Aunt Margaret was a wonderful woman," Nathan said. Ethan forced a smile and shook Nathan's hand. "Thank you, Nathan. She loved you very much, you know. You were like a son to her." Ethan replied smoothly, though his words felt empty. Nathan's intense stare made Ethan uneasy. Aunt Margaret was so generous. "She always thought of others," Nathan added. Ethan nodded again, but before he could say anything else, his phone buzzed in his pocket. "Excuse me," Ethan said, stepping away from the group to answer it. "Hello," he said quietly. "Mr. Thompson, this is Attorney Phillips from the notary office," the voice on the other end said. "We need you to come to the courthouse tomorrow. There's an urgent matter regarding Mrs. Anderson's will." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The tone of the lawyer's voice made him nervous. "Tomorrow? Can't this wait?" "We just buried my wife," Ethan said, trying to sound upset. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but this is extremely important. Be there at 10 a.m. sharp," the lawyer said firmly before hanging up. Ethan put his phone away, his face a mix of worry and curiosity. He walked over to Olivia, who was saying goodbye to the last guests. Leaning close to her, he whispered, "We need to go to the courthouse tomorrow. The lawyer says it's urgent." Olivia nodded, her face calm and serious. "Do you think there's a problem?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "No, it's just a formality. By this time tomorrow, we'll be celebrating." The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling excited. He dressed carefully in a dark gray suit, making sure he looked both serious and respectable. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he thought about Margaret's fortune, her houses, her shares in big companies, and her hidden bank accounts. Soon, it would all be his. He grabbed his phone and called Olivia. "Good morning," she said softly. "Ready for the big day?" "More than ready," Ethan replied, smiling. When Ethan arrived at the courthouse, Olivia was already waiting for him. She wore a simple black dress and a small silver brooch that Margaret had once given her. "You look perfect," Ethan said with a nod. They walked into the building together, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The courthouse smelled old, like dusty papers and cleaning supplies. When they reached the lawyer's office, Ethan froze. Standing outside was Nathan. "Good morning, Uncle Ethan," Nathan said with a small smile. Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "Nathan, what a surprise. What are you doing here?" Before Nathan could answer, the office door opened and Mr. Phillips, the lawyer, stepped out. "Ah, good. You're all here. Please come in," he said. Inside the office, everyone sat down as Mr. Phillips began speaking. "There's been a change to Mrs. Anderson's will," he said, looking nervous. Ethan frowned. "What kind of change?" The lawyer pulled out a document. A week before her death, Margaret decided to donate 60% of her fortune to charity. Ethan's heart sank. Most of the money he had been counting on was gone. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "Margaret would never do that without telling me." Mr. Phillips remained calm. "It's all legal, Mr. Thompson. She was of sound mind when she made the change." Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind racing. All his plans were starting to crumble. The notary, a man who helps with important documents, handed Ethan a paper. It was a copy of Aunt Margaret's will. Ethan grabbed it quickly and started reading it fast, looking for a mistake or a way to change it. Olivia stood nearby, watching. She felt scared and surprised. All her dreams about being rich were falling apart. She looked at Nathan, hoping to guess what he was thinking. But Nathan looked calm, almost like he already knew. "Did you know about this?" Olivia whispered to Nathan. Nathan just shrugged. "Aunt Margaret always liked surprises," he said. That answer didn't make Olivia feel better. What else did Nathan know that she didn't? Ethan finished reading the will. His face turned pale, and he was sweating. "This can't be right," he said, sounding angry and scared. "There must be a way to fight this." The lawyer, Mr. Phillips, looked nervous. "Mr. Ethan, I promise everything here is legal. Aunt Margaret followed all the rules, so her wishes would be respected." Ethan stood up so fast his chair made a loud screeching noise. "I won't accept this," he shouted. "I'll hire the best lawyers. I'll even take this to the Supreme Court if I have to." Nathan, who had been quiet all this time, finally spoke. "Uncle Ethan, calm down. Think about this carefully. Aunt Margaret had a reason for her decision." Ethan turned to Nathan and glared. "And what do you know about her reason? Did you make her change her mind?" The room felt tense, like something bad might happen. The notary looked scared, like he thought a fight was coming. "Gentlemen, please," Mr. Phillips said, trying to calm everyone down. "I know this is surprising, but the will is solid. You can fight it, but it will be hard, take a long time, and cost a lot of money." Ethan ran his hand through his hair, making it messy. He felt frustrated and confused. Why would Aunt Margaret do this to him? Did she find out something bad? Or did she just decide to change her plans at the last minute? Olivia saw Ethan getting upset and stepped in. "Mr. Phillips, can we have copies of the will to take home? I think we all need some time to think." The notary looked relieved. "Of course. I'll make certified copies for everyone." As they waited for the copies, the room became very quiet. Ethan stared out the window, looking angry and lost in thought. Olivia nervously played with her necklace. She kept glancing at Nathan, who still seemed calm, like nothing was wrong. Finally, Mr. Phillips came back with the papers. "Here you go. If you have questions, let me know." Ethan grabbed his copy and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned to Nathan. "This isn't over. I'll figure this out." Nathan nodded, his face still calm. "Do what you need to, Uncle Ethan. But remember, Aunt Margaret cared about everyone." Ethan glared at Nathan one more time before leaving. Olivia followed him. As they walked through the hallway, it felt cold and gloomy. "What are we going to do now?" Olivia asked softly. Ethan stopped and looked at her. His eyes were angry and determined. "We'll fight this. Margaret had no right to do this to us." Olivia nodded, but deep down, she felt unsure. Did they really know Aunt Margaret as well as they thought? And what was Nathan's part in all of this? Outside, the sky was gray and stormy, matching their mood. The day had started full of hope, but now it felt like the beginning of a long fight. They got to the car, and Ethan slammed his fist on the steering wheel. "Darn it," he yelled. "I waited so long for this, and now what?" Olivia put her hand on his shoulder. "We need to think, Ethan. Maybe there's something we can do." Ethan looked at her, his face a mix of anger and sadness. "Why would Margaret do this to us, Olivia?" "Why?" "I don't know," Olivia said quietly. Then she added, "But didn't you think Nathan acted like he knew something?" Ethan nodded slowly. He was always her favorite. Maybe he convinced her to change the will. But why? Nathan already has his own money. What could he want? Neither of them had an answer. Ethan started the car, and they drove into the busy city streets. As cars honked and people hurried around them, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how this day was supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be the start of an amazing, rich life. But instead, everything was falling apart. "We need a plan," he said suddenly. Olivia nodded. "Maybe we can find a mistake in the will. Something that lets us fight it." Ethan's face brightened a little. "Yeah, that might work. I know some good lawyers. I'll have them go over the will carefully." They drove into quieter streets, leaving behind the city noise. The fancy shops and buildings reminded them of what they almost had. "What if we don't find anything?" Olivia asked, her voice shaky. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Then we'll have to get creative." Olivia shivered. "What do you mean by that?" "Whatever it takes, Olivia," Ethan said, his voice serious. "We've worked too hard to lose now." The rest of the drive was silent. When they got to Ethan's big, fancy house, they just sat in the car for a moment. Neither of them wanted to face what was coming next. "Do you want to come in?" Ethan asked. He sounded tired. Olivia shook her head. "I need time to think. I'll call you later, okay?" Ethan nodded, and Olivia walked away. Ethan nodded and leaned in to give her a quick kiss before she got out of the car. He watched her walk away, her slim figure blending into the busy crowd on the street. Once she was gone, Ethan drove back home. As he stepped inside, the quiet hit him hard. He hadn't realized how much he missed the noise of the staff working, the sound of Margaret talking on her business calls, and all the activity that used to fill his house. Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey and sank onto the couch in the living room. His eyes landed on a big picture of Margaret hanging above the fireplace. She looked beautiful in the portrait, smiling like she knew a secret he didn't. "Why, Margaret?" Ethan muttered as he raised his glass in a toast that wasn't happy. "What were you thinking?" Just then, Ethan's phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. He almost didn't answer, but then he saw the name. It was Ramon, one of his business friends who always seemed to know things before anyone else. "Yeah," Ethan answered, trying to sound normal. "Ethan, it's me, Ramon," the voice said. "Ramon!" What a surprise. "What's up?" Ethan replied, sitting up straighter. There was a pause before Ramon asked, "Hey, I've been hearing rumors about Margaret's will. Is it true? Did she really change everything at the last minute?" Ethan felt his stomach tighten. How did people find out so fast? "Where did you hear that?" he asked carefully. "You know how it is, man," Ramon said. "News spreads quickly in our world. But is it true?" Ethan thought about lying, but he knew it wouldn't help. If people were already talking, the truth wouldn't stay hidden for long. There were some changes, he admitted, but I'm handling it. It's nothing to worry about. Ramon let out a low whistle. Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. If you need help, just let me know. Thanks, Ramon. I'll keep it in mind, Ethan said before ending the call. As he stared at his phone, Ethan's mind raced. If Ramon knew, then who else might know? The idea of becoming a joke to everyone, the man whose wife fooled him, made him feel sick. He got up and walked to Margaret's study. The room was just how she had left it. Papers were scattered on the desk, and a cup of coffee sat on the edge, half finished. Ethan began looking through the documents, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain why Margaret had made such big changes to her will. Had she found out about his affair with Olivia? Or was it something else? Something he didn't understand yet? His phone buzzed again and he jumped. It was a message from Olivia. It said, "We need to talk. It's urgent, asterisk, asterisk." Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. What now? He sighed and replied, "Okay, let's meet in an hour at the usual place, asterisk, asterisk." He put the phone down and looked at Margaret's portrait one more time. For a second, it seemed like her smile had changed, like it was mocking him. "This isn't over," Ethan muttered under his breath. "I'll figure out what you were up to, Margaret. And when I do, I'll take back everything." With that, he walked out of the study and closed the door behind him. At a quiet cafe, Ethan sat by the window, waiting for Olivia. The smell of coffee filled the air, and people chatted around him, but he couldn't focus. He kept looking at the door and the clock. When Olivia finally arrived, Ethan could tell something was wrong. Her usually perfect face looked worried, and she didn't have her usual confidence. "What's going on?" Ethan asked quietly as she sat down. Olivia leaned in close and whispered, "Someone knows about us, Ethan. They're threatening to tell everyone if we try to fight Margaret's will." Ethan froze. "What? Who? What exactly did they say?" "I don't know," Olivia said, her voice shaky. It was distorted, but they knew things, Ethan. Things only you and I could know. Ethan's mind raced. Who could it be? A house employee? Or maybe Margaret had figured out the affair before she died. "This changes everything," Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. "If this gets out, we'll lose more than just the inheritance. My career, my reputation. Everything will be ruined." Olivia looked at him with fear in her eyes, but there was also a hint of determination. "What are we going to do?" she asked. Ethan stayed quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "We need help. Someone who can find out who's behind this." Quietly, "Who do you have in mind?" Olivia asked. "Someone from my past," Ethan said, thinking back to his early days in San Francisco. 20 years ago, Ethan Thompson was a young lawyer from a small town called Sunflower, Mississippi. He was full of dreams and eager to succeed. With a cheap suit and a fake leather briefcase, he wandered the streets of San Francisco, looking for any chance to prove himself. That's when he met Maxwell Mendoza, a private detective who seemed to know everyone in the city. Maxwell saw something in Ethan and decided to help him. "In this city, kid," Maxwell once told him, "information is power, and power is money." Ethan listened to everything Maxwell taught him. Maxwell showed Ethan how to make the right friends, stay in the right circles, and keep secrets that could make or break someone. It was Maxwell who introduced Ethan to Margaret. Margaret was 15 years older than Ethan, smart, classy, and very, very rich. "She's your ticket to the top, kid," Maxwell had said. "Don't mess it up." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He used all his charm to win Margaret over, and it worked. They got married in less than a year in a fancy wedding that everyone in San Francisco talked about. At first, their marriage was good. Ethan worked really hard learning how Margaret's business worked. He made lots of new friends and built a good name for himself. But over time, Ethan started feeling like something was missing. Margaret was still beautiful and full of energy, but Ethan grew restless. Then Olivia appeared. She was young, smart, and very pretty. Everything Ethan thought he wanted. What started as a small secret turned into something serious. One day, Ethan got a phone call that brought him back to reality. It was Maxwell, an old detective he trusted. Maxwell had a rough voice from drinking and smoking for years. "Ethan Thompson needs my help. This must be serious," Maxwell said. "It is," Ethan replied while Olivia sat nearby, looking nervous. "I need you to check something for me, and you have to keep it a secret." Maxwell listened quietly as Ethan explained the problem without saying too much. When Ethan finished, Maxwell sighed. "You've gotten yourself into a big mess, kid. But for old time's sake, I'll help you. Give me a few days to look into it." After hanging up, Ethan turned to Olivia. "We have to be extra careful now. No more secret meetings or phone calls. We need to act like nothing happened." Olivia nodded, but Ethan could tell she was scared. "And if the person threatening us tells everyone, we'll be ready," Ethan added, trying to sound brave. "Maxwell's good at his job. He'll find out what's going on." They left the cafe separately and agreed not to meet for a few days. As Ethan walked to his car, he felt like someone was watching him. He looked around, but it was just regular people, office workers, students, and tourists. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. Was he just imagining things? Or was someone really following him? The next few days were stressful. Every phone call or message made Ethan nervous. Would this be the one that ruined everything? To keep people from getting suspicious, Ethan stuck to his routine. He went to work, attended meetings, and even helped with Margaret's business events. But inside, he felt like he was falling apart. One afternoon, Ethan got an unexpected visitor at work. It was Nathan, Margaret's nephew. Nathan walked into Ethan's office with a smile that didn't feel very friendly. "Uncle Ethan," Nathan said. "Got a minute?" "Of course," Ethan said, trying to stay calm. "Come in." Nathan sat down and didn't say anything for a while, making the room feel tense. Finally, Ethan asked, "How can I help you?" Nathan stared at him. "I want to talk about Aunt Margaret's will. I know you're thinking about challenging it. And why shouldn't I?" Ethan asked, trying to sound firm. "She was my wife. I have the right to question her decisions, especially if they don't make sense." Nathan leaned forward. "Aunt Margaret had her reasons. Good ones." "What reasons?" Ethan asked, feeling like he was close to learning something important. Nathan just smiled, a smile that reminded Ethan of Margaret. "That's something you'll have to figure out on your own. But let me warn you, if you keep digging, you might find things you wish you hadn't." With that, Nathan left, leaving Ethan full of questions. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He wandered around the house until he ended up in Margaret's study. He turned on the light and started searching through her things. Was there something here that could explain why Margaret had changed her will? He opened drawers and looked through shelves until he found a small leather notebook hidden behind some papers. It was Margaret's diary. Ethan hesitated. Reading her diary felt wrong, but he needed answers. He opened it and began to read. At first, it was just everyday stuff about work and meetings. But soon, the entries changed. One entry read, Asterisk, Ethan came home late again last night. He said he was working, but his shirt smelled like perfume. How much longer can I ignore the truth? Asterisk. Ethan felt sick. Margaret had known about Olivia. For how long? He kept reading. The entries became more upset and sad. One entry said, Asterisk, I hired a private investigator. I don't want to believe it, but I need to know the truth, asterisk. Then Ethan found the last entry, written just 2 days before Margaret died. Asterisk, I know everything about Ethan and Olivia, about their plans, about it all. How foolish I was to think he truly loved me. But I won't let them win. I've made my decision. May God forgive me, asterisk. Ethan slammed the diary shut, feeling like he might throw up. Margaret had known everything. Changing her will wasn't random. It was her way of getting back at him. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Maxwell. Asterisk, I've got information. Meet me tomorrow at 10. Same place, asterisk. Ethan stared at the message, then at the diary in his hands. What else could Maxwell have found out? And what was Ethan supposed to do now? He put the diary back where he found it and sat in the study, surrounded by memories of a life that was now gone. He knew he had a choice to make. Would he fight the will and risk losing everything? Or would he accept what Margaret had done and live with the guilt of betraying her? By morning, Ethan was still sitting in the study, unable to decide what to do next. Ethan Thompson sat alone early in the morning, feeling sad. In just a few hours, he had to meet a man named Maxwell and make an important choice. But for now, Ethan did something he hadn't done in a long time. He cried. He cried for Margaret, his wife, and the love they lost. He cried for the happy life they could have had together. And he cried for himself, for the person he had become. When the first rays of sunlight came through the window, Ethan wiped his tears and stood up. He had to decide what to do, and time was running out. He showered and got dressed, moving like a robot because his mind was busy thinking. As he fixed his tie in the mirror, he wondered, asterisk, if Margaret could see me now, what would she think? Would she feel sorry for me? Would she hate me? Or maybe, just maybe, would she still care about me? Asterisk. Ethan left his house as the sun warmed the streets. Cars and buses filled the roads, but he didn't notice them. He was thinking about his old neighborhood, where he and Maxwell used to meet. Back then, Ethan was a young lawyer, and Maxwell was a tough, smart man who showed him how to work in the shadows. When Ethan got to the park, Maxwell was already there, sitting on a bench and feeding the birds. Maxwell still looked like a detective from an old movie, with his grumpy face and scruffy clothes. You look terrible, kid, Maxwell said as Ethan sat beside him. Thanks, Ethan replied. What do you have for me? Maxwell pulled out a big brown envelope from his jacket and handed it to Ethan. Here's everything I found out about Margaret's will and some other stuff. Ethan's hand shook as he held the envelope. What did you find? Maxwell leaned closer. First, Margaret hired a private investigator to follow you. This guy was good, but not good enough to hide from me. Ethan nodded. This matched something he had read in Margaret's diary. What else? The investigator gave Margaret a full report about you and Olivia, Maxwell said. Photos, recordings, the whole thing. Margaret got it all a week before she changed her will. Hearing this felt like a punch in Ethan's stomach. Margaret had known everything about his secret relationship with Olivia. There's more, Maxwell added. His voice got quieter. The day before Margaret died, she had a long meeting with Nathan. They locked the office door and talked for hours. Nathan? Ethan's eyes widened. What does he have to do with this? I'm not sure, Maxwell said. But I think Margaret told Nathan everything. She might have asked him to protect her legacy. What she cared about most. Ethan thought about this. Nathan's strange warnings from the past suddenly made sense. Do you think Nathan is blackmailing me? Ethan asked softly. Maybe, Maxwell replied. But there's something else. I found out something about Olivia. Ethan felt a shiver go down his back. What is it? Maxwell leaned in closer and whispered. Olivia has a history of using powerful men. Every time, these men lost their money or got into big trouble. Ethan's heart sank. Was he just another man Olivia was using? Was he nothing more than a pawn in her game? There's more in the envelope, Maxwell said. But I'll warn you, you won't like what you read. Ethan looked at the envelope in his hands. It felt as heavy as a rock. Thanks, Maxwell, Ethan said quietly. I owe you one. You don't owe me anything, Maxwell replied. Just be careful, kid. You're playing a dangerous game, and you could get hurt. With that, Maxwell stood up and walked away. Ethan sat alone on the bench, holding the envelope full of secrets. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he watched families walking by, office workers rushing with coffee and dogs barking happily. But everything felt strange, like he was watching it from far away. Finally, Ethan gathered his courage and opened the envelope. As he read, his world fell apart. The photos and reports showed everything. His secret meetings with Olivia, their phone calls, and the moments they thought no one was watching. Margaret had known it all, but the part about Olivia was even worse. Maxwell hadn't been kidding. The papers showed that Olivia had done this to other men before. Rich, powerful men who ended up losing everything because of her. Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a text from Olivia. Asterisk, did you find out something? I need to see you, asterisk. Ethan stared at the message, feeling both angry and sad. How could he have been so blind? How had he fallen for her tricks? With shaky hands, he replied, asterisk, yeah, we need to talk. Meet me at our usual cafe in an hour, asterisk. He put the papers back into his briefcase and stood up. He had 1 hour to decide what to do. 1 hour to figure out if he should tell the truth or keep lying. 1 hour to choose if he wanted to fix his mistakes or let his life keep falling apart. As he walked to his car, Ethan knew that no matter what he chose, his life would never be the same. The game had changed, and now it was his move. Ethan drove through the crowded streets of San Francisco, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't stop, like a storm spinning out of control. The loud honking of car horns made his heart beat faster, and the bright red traffic lights felt like they were holding him back, making him wait when all he wanted was to move. San Francisco was always busy, noisy, and full of life, but today it felt hostile, like the entire city was against him. When Ethan finally arrived at the cafe, he spotted Olivia through the window. She was sitting at a small corner table, stirring her coffee over and over. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes darted around the room as though she couldn't sit still. She looked nervous, and Ethan felt his chest tighten. He stayed in the car for a moment, just watching her. How could she do this? He thought to himself. Olivia was stunningly beautiful, the kind of person who could make anyone believe in her with just a smile. But now Ethan knew the truth. Behind her beauty was a mountain of lies. She had fooled him completely, and he had been blind enough to trust her. Taking a deep breath, Ethan opened the car door and stepped out. The cool evening air brushed against his face, but it didn't calm him. He walked into the cafe, his heart pounding. Olivia looked up as the bell over the door jingled. She smiled, but her smile faded almost instantly when she saw the hard expression on Ethan's face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice uncertain as he sat down across from her. "What did you find out?" Ethan didn't answer her right away. He simply stared at her, his eyes filled with disappointment and anger. How had he let himself fall for her lies? The woman sitting before him wasn't who he thought she was, and now he had to face the truth. "I know everything," Ethan finally said, his voice low but steady. Olivia's face turned pale. Her hand stopped stirring the coffee. "What do you mean, everything?" Ethan didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the table and slid it toward her. "Read it," he said. Olivia hesitated, her fingers trembling as she picked up the envelope. She opened it carefully, as though afraid of what she would find inside. As she read the contents, Ethan watched her expression change. At first, she looked confused. Then, fear crept into her wide eyes. Finally, her face hardened, and she set the papers down on the table. "I can explain," she said quickly, her voice shaking. Ethan shook his head. "I don't want excuses," he said sharply. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was a coldness in her gaze Ethan had never seen before. "The truth is, you're just like all the others, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with bitterness. "You think you're different because you're rich, powerful, and successful. But you're worse." Her words hit Ethan like a punch in the gut, but he stayed silent, refusing to let her see how much they hurt. "And Margaret," Olivia continued, her voice sharper now, "she knew exactly what you were from the beginning. Why do you think she changed her will?" It wasn't just revenge, Ethan. She was protecting herself and her legacy from you. Ethan stared at her in shock. Every word felt like a slap to his pride. He had thought he was in control, that he could outsmart everyone around him. But Margaret, his late wife, had been far ahead of him. And Olivia, this woman he had trusted, had been playing her own game all along. "What do you want from me?" Ethan asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You have a choice," she said. "You can fight Margaret's will, but if you do, I'll tell everyone about us, about the affair, about the lies. Everyone will know." "Are you blackmailing me?" Ethan asked, disbelief written across his face. Olivia shrugged. "Call it what you want. A deal, maybe. You're good at deals, aren't you?" She stood up, grabbing her purse. "You have until tomorrow to decide," she said, her voice colder than ever. "Choose wisely, Ethan." Then she turned and walked out, leaving Ethan alone in the cafe. He stared at the table, feeling the weight of her words. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, regret, sadness, and shame. That evening, Ethan wandered aimlessly through the streets of San Francisco. The tall skyscrapers and bright lights, which once made him feel powerful and important, now felt hollow. Every step he took reminded him of his mistakes. He had betrayed Margaret, the woman who had trusted him with everything. And for what? A fleeting thrill? By nightfall, Ethan found himself standing in front of Margaret's grave. The cemetery was quiet and dark, with only the soft sound of leaves rustling in the wind. He stared at the marble headstone, the words engraved on it blurring through his tears. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For lying to you. For hurting you. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope you can hear me." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something inside him shift. It was as if the weight of his guilt was forcing him to change. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. When the other person answered, Ethan took a deep breath. "Nathan," he said, "we need to talk. About Margaret's will, and about everything else." The next day, Ethan met Nathan, Margaret's nephew, in a sleek, modern office. Nathan sat behind a large glass desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Though young, Nathan carried himself with confidence and authority. "I'm glad you came, Uncle Ethan," Nathan said. His tone was polite but formal, with no warmth. "What have you decided?" Ethan sighed deeply, the lines on his face showing how tired he was. "I'm withdrawing my challenge to Margaret's will," he said. "She was right to do what she did. I don't deserve her fortune." Nathan raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What made you change your mind?" Ethan pulled out the report he had shown Olivia and placed it on the desk. "This," he said, "and everything else I've learned. I know Margaret found out about my affair with Olivia. I know she changed her will because of it. And I know you've been protecting her legacy." Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Aunt Margaret told me everything before she passed," he said. "She asked me to make sure her wishes were carried out." Ethan looked down ashamed. "Did you send the blackmail messages?" Nathan shook his head. "Not directly, but I made sure someone did. I didn't want you to know it was me." "And Olivia?" Ethan asked. "Did you know about her past?" "We found out during the investigation," Nathan replied. "Margaret was devastated. Not just because of your betrayal, but because Olivia deceived her too." Ethan felt his chest tighten with guilt. He had hurt the woman who had loved him deeply. And for what? Nothing. "I want to make things right," Ethan said softly. "I want to help carry out Margaret's wishes. She wanted to build schools, clinics, and businesses to help people. Let me help with that." Nathan studied Ethan carefully. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said, "but I'll be watching you. One mistake, and it's over." Ethan nodded. "I won't mess up," he promised. Over the next few months, Ethan worked tirelessly with Nathan. Together, they built schools in poor neighborhoods, opened clinics for families who couldn't afford doctors, and gave small loans to women starting businesses. Slowly but surely, people began to see Ethan in a new light. Olivia, meanwhile, tried to spread rumors about their affair. But Nathan, always one step ahead, used his connections to shut the rumors down. Frustrated, Olivia eventually left the city. One sunny afternoon, Ethan returned to Margaret's grave. This time, he brought Nathan with him. They stood side by side, each holding a bouquet of flowers. "I've made so many mistakes, Margaret," Ethan said softly, "but I'm trying to make things right. I hope you can see that." Nathan placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "She knows, Uncle Ethan, and I think she'd be proud of you." As they walked away, the sun began to set, painting the sky with beautiful colors of gold and red. Ethan glanced up, feeling a small sense of peace. "Margaret used to say that real wealth isn't about what you have, but what you give," Ethan said with a faint smile. "I finally understand what she meant." Nathan nodded. She was always wise. "I'm glad you've learned her lesson." As night fell, Ethan felt ready to face the future. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he was determined to honor Margaret's memory, not with words, but with actions. If this story made you think or gave you a new perspective, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our future videos. Let's keep sharing thought-provoking stories and learning from life's lessons together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.